All right, we're back on the Skymaster F-4 Phantom large version. Last video we covered all the equipment. We got started on the tail, so let's dive back into the rear section of this aircraft. Last video we got our rudder installed, that's all finished, and we are moving on to our elevator servos. So we got our servo cable mounts done up there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take off our servos. We're going to ensure that everything's Loctited and done up nice and snug. We'll have to plug these guys into our central box to confirm that our arms are straight and everything. But we're going to basically get these guys fastened, ready to go. All right, so with our servos plugged in here, made very sure that we are plugging the correct servos in, and I marked them. So left 5, right 6. And these are going the correct direction. So when we do up elevator, the linkage goes back, which will lift the back of the elevator. So we're moving the right direction, not that that really matters. But what I've done here is initially these arms were kind of sitting like this. So they weren't lined up with each other, which is, I mean, it's fine. It's kind of common because you got two servos, servo arms, whatever, flipped the same way. So what I did was I went in and added 10% sub trim on one elevator, 10% sub trim on the other elevator, and they are both lined up pretty much perfect right now. We're going to make small changes there, but that's pretty much exactly what we're looking for. So we know that that is initially set up and we're good to go there. So what I'll do now is take my servos off. These are not Loctited. And I will go through and I will Loctite all these guys to the brackets, Loctite the arms in place, and get all that done, and then we'll get them reinstalled on our plate. So we've got everything Loctited and ready to go on our rear horizontal stab servos. So those are all ready to be installed. We've got our spirals done on our wires, and we can now get that bolted in place and Loctite our fixing screws. So these steps are fairly straightforward, but you need to follow them because obviously you lose access to everything that's underneath. All right, elevator servos are all installed. We've got our servos plugged in. These connectors were marked with a little silver dot signaling the signal side of the connector. So that is done. And next thing we're going to do is install our horizontal stab mount here. So these have lock nuts on the back, so we've just snugged those guys up to make sure that we're happy with everything. They're all tight, and we can get this installed now in the aircraft. And again, that covers up the rudder servo, so you pretty much want to make sure that that is 100%, otherwise you'll be taking it off. Now, our final incident setup here with our horizontal stab, we won't do right now. We can get that installed now, but we won't, fasten anything down permanently because we may need to shim these one side or the other side. When I was building the smaller F-4 Phantoms from Skymaster a year ago, we built a pair of them. We had to adjust the horizontal stabs a little bit, so by putting washers underneath one side just to bring it in line with the wings. So that's an important step. Make sure you do that, otherwise your wings may be here and your horizontal stab may be sitting at a funny angle. So anyways, we're going to get this plate bolted down and then we'll be ready to put our horizontal stab in place. Okay, so horizontal stab, we're ready to bolt this in place. We may end up taking it off again, probably taking it off for shipping, but that's okay. So that's how it goes. Now there is balsa inside the horizontal stab. So when you look in the holes there, that's what you're seeing. So what I do in a situation like this is we want to stiffen up that balsa that's in there. So we take some thin CA, some very thin CA, and just soak the wood that's inside there. You can see it's smoking, so yes, it is balsa. The balsa reacts very quickly. There we go. And we'll flip it over to make sure we get some going the other direction. This just helps stiffen up all the wood and stuff and support that's in there. There we go. Now we'll flip it over the other side and just make sure we put some in this side just to make sure that we got it everywhere. Awesome. So now we got a little bit more support with our wood structure in there and we're ready to bolt this thing down. All right, so looking at the forums online on RC Universe and some of the build threads on this aircraft, basically our neutral is about 1/2 inch from our panel line there, our color joint. So we're about there on our neutral point. And what that means is our arm here is a little bit too short, about 1/2 inch to 3/4 too short. Reason for that is previously they had an L bracket type thing and the mounting hole would be pretty much bang on where it is. They've changed in recent years to the center mount. It works a little bit better apparently with the ball joint, but the other thing that it does is it also centers on your pivot point. Previously your mounting point was on the front edge of your pivot. This one is right over the center of the pivot, so it's a better system apparently. And so what we need to do is we need to make a longer setup here. But before we do this, we want to be able to plug those servos in. We could, but what I'll do is I'm going to get the wiring done on the front end of the aircraft, get our ash lock connector installed, figure that out, and then we'll be able just to plug into the ash lock connector to run our horizontal stab servos. All right, as we work on the wiring here, obviously we've got our surface controls and light control wires all coming to this point. And the last things we need to think about as we get to this stage is number one, our operational tail hook that we want to create. So we have to plan on a servo wire coming to this area and going to our connectors right there. And also we need an airline to operate our cylinder for our chute mechanism. And while I was thinking about this, I mentioned in a previous video that I took some shots at the Pima Air Museum and this actually works out great. So essentially the stock tail hook actually hinges right on this point right there. So I'm thinking initially here putting like a metal piano hinge or something like that in this area, and basically the entire operational tail hook will hinge on that panel line there. So that I think is going to work out very well. Feels like there's some structure in here as well, at least in the face. So that's good. And then we also have kind of decent access to that area right there as well. So I'm going to start giving that some thought, but I know at least where we need to run our wire to. All right, so took a look at some different hinging options for our tail hook. Initially, I was thinking about using like the little Dubro plastic hinges. Then I have this one from an Ultra Flash, which size-wise is pretty much perfect, but I'm not too keen on having some plastic hinges back here, primarily because we've got our tail cones here. It's going to be, I mean, not necessarily hot, but it could be hot right in this area. So then I found a piece of piano hinge, which is metal. So essentially we're the same size as this plastic hinge, but this is going to be way better, and this is exactly what I was thinking. Now the only downside to using the piano hinge is you just have to make room for the actual hinge point itself. So we may do a little bit of an indent here on the hook and a little bit of an indent on the fuselage. We want to try and get that joint as tight as possible. Reason for that is if you look at the base, it sits perfectly with it tight. If we start to go like this, it doesn't really sit properly, especially in that area right there. So it's designed to sit up against there nice and snug, which is where we want it when it's at its resting position. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut a piece of this hinge off. So we're going to use 1, 2, 3 of these guys. So we're going to cut right here in this area. If you take a look at how that sits on the hook, we've got plenty of room there from the edges, so that should work good. The other benefit of using only 3 of these pieces is if we do our little slot here and a little slot in the fuselage, have the hinge point hidden in those little slots, then from the side profile, this hinge will be basically invisible. All right, so we've got all of our wire leads covered in snakeskin, and these are going to come to a 12-pin ash lock connector, and then we'll use a 6-pin ash lock connector for this side here. So yeah, so that's how we're going to connect these 2 fuselage pieces together, and I just want all the wires protected. We do have our wire running up there for our tail hook, which I haven't figured out exactly or done anything there yet, but just was getting the wire set up. And the point of doing this wire, of course, like I said, is we've got our ash lock connector now we'll put on this end, and then that'll allow us to run our tail servos and get that stuff set up. All right, so we've got all of our wires fastened. We've got our ends done up here. The end is marked as well too, so we know what is what. And what I'm going to do is put some shoe goop on all of our wire fasteners just to make sure they don't come loose. So we've got one here, and then we've got two in the back there. And then we can get our elevator plugged in and work on our linkage. All right, so I took apart the stock linkage here and just put a piece of 3mm rod on there. We will reinforce this with a solid piece of tubing. But I just wanted to show you the difference here in the linkage length. So it needs the other one to get this all set up properly, but basically we're adding whatever that is, 1/2 inch kind of thing to the length to make it line up properly. And then for alignment here, you're about 1/2 inch from the joint to the elevator. So right now, that is basically where we want to be for our neutral position. All right, so we've got our linkages evened out there, and travel right now with the servo set to 100% works out basically perfect. So this travel is 70mm, which is what the manual suggests. Now the only variable here is when we go up elevator, before we get to full travel, the arms contact the horizontal on the elevator. So we're gonna have to put 2 little slots in there, 2 little half circles just to allow these items to clear. Not a big deal at all, but we're really close to the end of our travel. Like it starts to contact right there. So there's just a little bit of stick movement left, not much. So. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll get our pieces of carbon that we're gonna put on here. You could use aluminum or anything like that, but we're gonna use carbon and get those glued in place so these are nice and solid. All right, so we got our linkage arms all done, carbon installed, used High-Sol 9462 underneath the carbon, so those are curing right now. Installed our plunger and our chute mechanism into the aircraft. Now there's a couple things to figure out here with the chute, and basically this is the time to install this. So what we're going to end up doing is putting a slot here in this back plate and the actual the chute cylinder itself, and essentially this keeper goes through there and mounts, and then you just need enough of that slot so the cords can slip through and into the tube. Because if you have the cord sticking out like this, it kind of prevents the whole system from working very well, but we'll keep that to a minimum. I mean, in this case, if they're not bundled up, it works reasonably well. So anyways, we're going to get that figured out, and that'll be one of the final steps here for the tail. And then after that, we'll put a airline going from this side of the cylinder forward. Now, you don't need one on each side of the cylinder. You only need one to activate the cylinder or the plunger, and then when you go to put the chute back in after your flight, you push that plunger back in, and the chute's actually sitting inside there right now, just like that. All right, so we got the airline hooked up here. I used the Festo line, not the stock Skymaster line. Reason for that is when we put our connector on the fuselage here, if we're using the Festo line, we can use a 3mm Festo fitting to join them together, which is going to be perfect. So the path there just comes along the top of the fuselage with the wire connectors. Now, one of the things with the plunger setup here is if you push the plunger all the way back to the base of the air cylinder, what happens is the elevator doesn't have enough room to move here. So it's got just enough space where that air cylinder will sit too low and you can't go up elevator. So when you're pushing the chute mechanism or plunger back in, you only need to push it in as far as the chute needs. So essentially the plunger right now is sitting about right here, not all the way back here. So with it sitting about this area, there is zero interference with the linkage and the air cylinder. So that is the better way to set things up like that. And that is the chute mechanism. So that is wonderful. I think we're okay to install our underside piece here, but there's really no need to install that yet because we've got good access. You've got little wood plates everywhere where it needs to be screwed in, so those are pretty obvious. And when you move the horizontal stab here, you've got access to all those little mounting points, including like that guy right there. So we're not going to put the rear cover on yet, we'll just leave that be. All right, so moving forward in the system here, we've got our turkey feathers, and they're pretty easy to install because they are not oblonged, so they are symmetrical all the way around, which is awesome. So what we're going to do here is we are going to paint this section right here with BVM ceramic paint, and this is also going to be where we mount our afterburner lights as well. So let's pull those out and take a look at them. So we do need to worry about the wire setup on the afterburner lights, but those can be their own separate connector on the bottom portion of the fuselage here or something. We'll figure that part out, but that'll be fairly easy. You can just put that together down at the bottom. But there is the afterburner setup there, and quite simple, quite straightforward. When we're ready to install them, they essentially get mounted on the tail cones or turkey feathers like that, and there'll be a nice amount of clearance between the pipe and the afterburner lights. Now these are the very, very bright Unilight afterburner lights. These ones have the regular and overdrive setup on them. This is going to be insanely bright on this aircraft, so great addition to the Skymaster F-4. So last thing we have to do with the rear end here is our turkey feather afterburner setup, and we also need to figure out our operational tail hook setup now. All right, so looking at the tail cone setup here, turkey feathers, pipe. The pipe does fit through, but that's as far as we can get it to go. So we do need to sand just a couple millimeters off of each of those little support pieces that come through. So we'll just use our Dremel and just flatten those guys out. And the pipes should come pretty much flush with the end of the turkey feathers. So that's the goal. All right, and we've got our BVM ceramic paint, the heat shield paint installed on the turkey feathers. And you can see there just a little bit of a buzz with the Dremel is all it needs just to flatten those guys out a little bit. And now the pipe slides in there perfectly. So we're gonna let those dry and cure till tomorrow, and we will return. All right, I really am digging this removable tail section on this plane. It makes doing the tail so much easier rather than having to dig through the fuselage. So definitely a plus on this kit. So we've got our turkey feather tail cones all ready to go. We've put our heat shield on there. They're set in place. And these guys here are designed for some wood screws to hold those in place. So there's a nice big hole on the actual turkey feather for lining it up. And then we've got a wood screw hole there on the fuselage to screw into. So I am assuming that we're probably using like this type of screw right here to hold them in place. So turkey feathers are screwed into place. Here is the model of the afterburner lights that we are using in case you are building this kit and wondering. That's a question I often get. So the 108.6 inside, 122.4 outside. And there is the model number right there. So that's what we're using. So what I like to do with these afterburner rings is pull them out of the package and put some goop on our connection points here for our wire. This just provides some relief, wire relief there. And it's just a nice little touch to make sure that the wires don't vibrate and come loose. Not that I've seen it in the past, but just more of a preventative thing. So you've got two sets to do on this, these guys. All right, so we've got our afterburner lights tacked in place. Just hold those in place, use some thick CA, get them stuck. And now I'll mix up some epoxy. Probably gonna use West Systems stuff in here because it'll be kind of clear looking. and we'll mix up some West Systems and go in here and glue these guys to the turkey feather supports. Former work there. All right, so we've got our epoxy holding our Afterburner lights in place, so that's all done. I cut some slots in our operational tail hook. So cut a slot there for our hinge and a slot in the fuselage. Now the point of this little U shape here is when this gets installed, it sits down and the only thing visible is basically the hinge itself. As I mentioned previously, we want this to be as tight as possible, which this accomplishes. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to get the hinge high-soled in place. We've got access to this side through the fuselage. We don't have access into the tail hook itself. So we're going to get this all mounted first. We'll worry about our opening here for the servo and our mounting point and all that later on. But for now, we just want to get this glued in place. So we'll get it glued in place. We'll tape everything down nice and straight and solid where we need it to be. And we will leave the tail section of this plane to cure. All right, so tail hook is fastened in place, everything's glued, and I'm happy with the way this turned out. So just a nice little hinge reveal there, basically almost invisible, and the hook is perfect. So we're gonna let that cure, leave it be, and we will come back to the tail section when that's all nice and cured. Just a reminder, guys, make sure you check out The Lighter Side of RC After Dark. The After Dark is a completely separate channel. It's where we do live streams here from the shop, and we do it in the wintertime. We kind of do it every 2 weeks. Summertime gets a little bit lax, but it's tons of fun. I love it because if you're on the live, while we're on the live, or while the live is happening, you get to interact with us, ask us questions. We'll answer your questions while we're on the live. So it's tons of fun. Definitely encourage you to check it out. There's some links down below. All right, guys, and that wraps up video number 2 in the build series of the Skymaster XL version of the F4 Phantom. This thing is going together so well. Obviously, we've got to finish up that tail hook. That's going to be where we start in the next video, and that really gets our rear end here completed, and we'll start to move into the main fuselage section, or the mid section if you want to call it that. Awesome airplane. It's going together very well. Very impressed on the quality so far. Skymaster's done a wonderful job on this aircraft. So if you guys have any questions or comments, you can list them down below in the comments section. You can also reach out to me, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com, and that way you'll know I pretty much guaranteed going to see your email. Thanks guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.